A single dad mechanic goes on a blind date that feels like a disaster until a mysterious woman walks in, calls his name, and turns his night upside down. What he doesn't know is she's hiding a secret powerful enough to change both their lives forever. Mark Russell had faced stubborn engines, sleepless nights, and the unpredictable moods of his 6-year-old daughter, but nothing made him as nervous as sitting inside La Valora, the city's most luxurious restaurant, trying to look like he belonged there. Crystal chandeliers hung above him like frozen fireworks, scattering golden reflections across polished marble floors that gleamed brighter than the hood of any car he had ever waxed. The air smelled faintly of rosemary, butter, and something he couldn't pronounce, and every clink of silverware felt like a reminder that he was a mechanic who spent most of his life in grease-stained coveralls, not tailored suits. His flannel shirt and freshly scrubbed hands felt like flimsy armor against the sophistication of the place. Yet he was there on a blind date his coworkers had practically bullied him into, insisting that a good man like him deserved companionship again, after years of raising Lily alone. He tried to sit tall, but his shoulders tightened each time a sharply dressed waiter passed by, eyeing him as if scanning for the reservation mistake. His date, Emma, arrived a few minutes later, a soft-spoken woman in a pastel dress that made her look delicate and perfectly suited to the restaurant's elegance. She greeted him warmly, and they settled into polite conversation, work, weather, hobbies, polite laughter at polite moments. But even as they talked, Mark could feel an invisible stiffness, a sense that they were two puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit. Emma was nice, gentle, respectable, everything someone might hope for in a blind date, but there was no spark, no moment where conversation slipped into something natural. Instead, every sentence felt like stepping carefully around unfamiliar ground. Mark tried, he genuinely did, but he could tell Emma felt the same slight disconnect, the space between them filled with effort rather than ease. He reminded himself that not every date had to feel magical, that maybe comfort grew over time, but something deep inside whispered that the evening wasn't shaping into the future his friends imagined for him. Still, he smiled, answered her questions, and nodded politely, determined to give the night a fair chance. Then the restaurant doors opened with a soft chime, and Mark turned instinctively just to glance, just to pass a moment, but the sight that walked through the entrance pulled the air straight from his lungs. A woman stepped inside with an aura that didn't come from the chandeliers or the designer coat draped over her shoulders. Her dark wavy hair framed a face both elegant and sharp, her hazel eyes scanning the room with a mixture of urgency and determination. She looked like someone who stepped out of a different story, entirely high-powered, intelligent, self-assured, but beneath that, something troubled flickered in her expression. She wasn't looking for him. She wasn't looking for anyone. Yet when her gaze swept across the restaurant and landed on him, something in her posture shifted, and before Mark could blink, she was striding toward his table with purpose, leaving behind the delicate balance of his quiet, awkward date and unknowingly altering the course of his evening and his life forever. Mark's breath caught as the mysterious woman approached, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, each step sending a ripple of tension through the room as diners paused mid-conversation to glance her way. Emma noticed the shift in Mark's attention and turned too, her eyes widening slightly as the elegant stranger stopped right beside their table. For a split moment, Mark expected her to apologize and walk on, but instead, she leaned closer, her voice soft yet urgent as she said, "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I need your help." Mark blinked in confusion, glancing sideways at Emma, who looked just as startled. "Do we know each other?" he asked, unsure whether he was forgetting a customer from his shop. "No," the woman whispered, shaking her head quickly, "but I saw you earlier, and I don't have much time. I need a mechanic now." The desperation in her tone cut through his nerves instantly. It wasn't the dramatic kind, it was the real, quiet kind that came from someone trying hard to keep control. She opened her sleek designer briefcase to pull out a car key, and in that brief moment, a folder shifted inside, revealing the unmistakable logo of Carter Dynamics, one of the biggest companies in the region. Mark's eyes flicked to it instinctively, but before he could process the connection, the woman pressed the key into his hand. "Please," she said, her hazel eyes locking onto his. "My car broke down behind the restaurant. I can't call assistance. I can't wait an hour. I just need someone who knows what they're doing." Her words came fast, like someone who wasn't used to asking for help, but had no other option. Mark was torn. This was supposed to be a date, an attempt to reconnect with the world outside of work and fatherhood. Leaving felt rude, irresponsible even, but ignoring someone in genuine need felt worse. He turned to Emma, searching her face for judgment or irritation, but she surprised him with a gentle, understanding smile. "You should go," she said softly. "She looks like she really needs help." That small kindness from Emma made the choice clear. Mark stood up, nerves replaced by a mechanic's instinctive purpose. The mysterious woman offered a brief, relieved nod, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as she waited. For the first time, Mark noticed that beneath her sharp professional aura, she was actually trembling a little, as if trying to hold herself together. "I'm Mark," he said quietly, just to ground the moment. "Sarah," she replied, almost breathlessly. "Thank you, Mark." "Really?" Emma watched them with an expression that was part curiosity, part acceptance, almost as if she sensed the evening had shifted into a story she wasn't meant to be part of. And as Mark followed Sarah toward the back exit, leaving behind the quiet hum of the restaurant and the remnants of a date that would never become anything more, he felt a strange pull in his chest, not romantic, not yet, but the unmistakable thrill of stepping into something unexpected, something that didn't fit into the clean structure of his day, something that was already changing everything. Mark followed Sarah through the narrow side hallway of the restaurant, the polished ambience fading behind them as the cool night air slipped in from the back exit she pushed open. Outside, dim security lights cast long shadows across the quiet lot, illuminating a sleek black luxury sedan parked crookedly near the dumpsters, hazard lights blinking like a frantic heartbeat. Sarah exhaled shakily, running a hand through her hair as though the fresh air gave her a moment to breathe. Mark noticed the tremor in her fingers, not the kind caused by the cold, but by pressure, anxiety, or maybe fear. "It just died," she said, gesturing helplessly toward the car. "I was on my way to a meeting, but I stopped to pick up documents, and when I tried to leave nothing." She wasn't telling him everything, that much was obvious. Her eyes carried the weight of a woman balancing 1,000 unspoken things, and the urgency in her voice wasn't the kind that came from inconvenience, it came from consequences. But Mark wasn't one to push. He had learned long ago that people revealed the truth when they felt safe, not when they were interrogated. So instead, he crouched down beside the car and asked calmly, "Can you start it for me?" Sarah nodded and slipped into the driver's seat, trying the ignition. The engine sputtered, coughed, and went silent with a dying whine. Mark listened carefully, mentally piecing together the clues. "Electrical," he murmured. "Something's shorting out." When he opened the hood, the faint smell of burned insulation drifted out. He clicked his tongue. "Something chewed through your wiring." Sarah groaned softly. "Perfect. Just perfect." Mark expected her to stand back like most luxury car owners, but instead, she stepped beside him, leaning in under the hood, her elegant coat brushing against his arm. "Is it bad?" she asked, peering at the tangled wires. "Not too bad," he said, glancing at her in surprise. "You know your way around an engine?" "More than people think," she said with a small smirk that didn't reach her eyes. "High-performance engines overheat easily, and this model tends to act up if the wiring harness gets damaged." Mark blinked. "Most people don't even know what a wiring harness is." Sarah shrugged, though her posture softened in a way that suggested she liked surprising him. "My job is demanding. I pick up things." Before he could ask more, her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She stepped away, answering it quickly. Her entire demeanor shifted back straight, voice clipped, tone polished. "No, I told them the numbers aren't final. The press cannot have anything yet, and the board needs to wait until tomorrow. Keep the shareholders calm." Mark stiffened, pretending not to listen, but the words sank in anyway. Press, board, shareholders. This wasn't a woman having an ordinary bad night. This was someone holding up an entire empire. When Sarah ended the call and turned back to him, her eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and resignation, as though she already knew he had heard more than she intended. In that moment, Mark realized that the woman who had rushed into his quiet blind date wasn't just mysterious, she was someone living a life far bigger, heavier, and lonelier than she wanted to admit. And whatever secret she carried was about to collide with his world in ways neither of them could have predicted. Sarah slipped her phone back into her coat, the polished CEO mask dissolving the moment she looked at Mark again, replaced by a quiet vulnerability that caught him off guard. She opened her mouth as if to explain the call, then closed it, her hesitation saying more than any confession could. Mark didn't push. Years of raising Lily alone taught him that people open up only when they feel safe. Instead, he focused on the car, rolling up his sleeves with the familiar comfort of someone who knew engines better than emotions. He grabbed a small flashlight from his belt, the beam cutting through the dark as he examined the frayed wires deeper under the hood. "Yep," he muttered. "Something chewed through. Maybe a squirrel or a rat." Lucky it didn't spark a fire. Sarah crouched beside him, surprising him again by not keeping her distance. Her expensive coat brushed against the dusty bumper, but she didn't seem to care. "Can you fix it?" she asked, her voice low, almost hopeful. "I can try," he said, pulling a small toolkit from his pocket. "Temporary fix. Should hold until morning." She watched him work with an attentiveness he wasn't used to. Most people hovered nervously or scrolled on their phones while he repaired things, but Sarah stood still, studying each movement as though the rhythm of his hands calmed something inside her. After a moment, she spoke softly. "It's been a long day," Mark smirked. "I kind of figured." She let out a breathy laugh, then rested back on her heels. "I had a meeting with the board, 3 press briefings, and a sudden software failure at the office. And then, on my way to deal with more problems, my car died. Honestly, at this point, the universe is just having fun." Her humor was thin, a fragile layer over exhaustion. Mark tightened a connector and glanced her way. "You're carrying a lot. Anyone can see that." She blinked, caught off guard by his gentleness. "Most people don't. They only see what they want to see." He shrugged, returning to the wires. "Most people don't look closely." Silence settled between them. Not awkward, but grounding to strangers finding unexpected comfort in shared air. When Mark finished splicing the wires, he wiped his hands on a rag, nodding toward the driver's seat. "Try it now." Sarah slid inside, turned the key, and the engine roared to life, smooth and powerful. Relief washed over her features like soft rain. She stepped out, smiling with genuine gratitude, a smile that transformed her from a stressed executive into something warmer, almost tender. "You have no idea how much this means to me," she said. "Actually," Mark replied, leaning against the car, "I think I do." Her hazel eyes lingered on him longer than before, searching, questioning, softening. Under the pale glow of the parking lot lights, something shifted, something quiet and spoken, but undeniable. For the first time all evening, it wasn't just her car that had been fixed. It was the weight on her shoulders, the isolation in her eyes, the frantic pace of her day. And Mark, without meaning to, had given her a moment of peace she didn't realize she had needed so desperately. Sarah leaned against the car door, the faint hum of the engine vibrating through the metal, as if echoing the sudden calm settling over her. For a moment, she simply breathed, her eyes drifting toward the night sky, as though grounding herself after a day that had nearly crushed her. Mark watched her quietly, wiping his hands with the rag, trying not to stare, but unable to ignore the shift in her. She no longer looked like the polished woman who walked into the restaurant radiating pressure. She looked human, real, fragile in a way she didn't let others see. "You really saved me tonight," she murmured without looking at him. "More than you know." Mark shrugged lightly, trying to downplay the weight in her voice. "Just fixing a car." She turned to him with a faint, almost sad smile. "You didn't just fix a car, Mark. You fixed a disaster. I was supposed to meet someone important tonight to finalize a merger. My absence might already be a headline by morning." Mark paused mid-wipe. "A headline?" She hesitated, the truth pressing against her lips like steam building behind glass. Then, as if deciding she was too tired to keep carrying the lie, she exhaled slowly and said, "I'm the CEO of Carter Dynamics." The words landed between them like a spark on dry ground. Mark blinked. Once, twice, The Carter Dynamics? He repeated, genuinely shocked. The one with the blue skyscraper. Yes, she finished gently. And the aerospace division. And the national contracts. And the board of directors who think I live inside the office. Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding, rubbing the back of his neck. Wow, that's a lot. Sarah laughed softly, but it wasn't amusement, it was exhaustion laced with truth. It is, and I've spent years trying to prove I deserve the position. Hiding every weakness, every mistake. Tonight just felt like everything spiraled out of my control. She leaned her head back against the car. And then I saw you. Someone who didn't want something from me. Someone who wasn't calculating or fake. Someone real. Mark felt his chest tighten, not with romance, but with the strange, warm sympathy. He stepped closer, hands in his pockets. I wasn't expecting any of this either, he admitted. One minute, I'm on a blind date that feels like a school interview. Next minute, I'm fixing a CEO's luxury car behind a fancy restaurant. Her eyes softened. I'm sorry about your date. I didn't mean to interrupt. It's okay, Mark said honestly. We weren't really clicking. Sarah sighed, her breath turning to mist in the cool night air. Still, she whispered, I hate that my problem spilled into your evening. Mark shook his head. Everyone needs help sometimes. Even CEOs. He said the last words lightly, but they struck something deep inside her. She looked at him, seeing not a mechanic in a flannel shirt, but a man who wasn't intimidated by her title, her status, or the weight she carried. For a woman used to being admired from a distance and feared up close, Mark's steady presence was something rare, something grounding, something she didn't know she had been searching for until now. Sarah's confession lingered in the cool night air, settling between them like a fragile truth finally freed from its cage, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Mark leaned back against the car, crossing his arms loosely as he studied her, not as the CEO everyone else saw, but as a woman standing in a dimly lit parking lot, exhausted and unexpectedly honest. Sarah wrapped her coat tighter around herself, the faint tremble now less from stress and more from the vulnerability of being seen without armor. It's strange, she whispered, her eyes drifting toward the faint glow of the city skyline. People think being CEO means having everything figured out, but most days I'm just surviving. Mark nodded slowly. I get that more than you think. She turned to him, surprised. Mark's voice was low, steady. When Lily's mom left, everyone called me strong, like I had some magical ability to handle everything. But inside, I was barely keeping things together. I worked all day, raised a baby girl at night, slept maybe 3 hours. People saw a mechanic with grit, but not the man who was just exhausted. Sarah softened. Lily, she repeated gently. Your daughter? Yeah, he said, a small smile forming. 6 years old, smarter than me, funnier than me, and definitely the boss of the house. Sarah laughed, the sound soft but sincere, and for the first time that evening, it wasn't weighed down by pressure. She's lucky, she murmured, to have a father who shows up. Mark felt warmth push through his chest at the simple acknowledgement. Most people overlooked that part of him. Most people didn't understand the weight of trying to be everything for someone small. And what about you? He asked quietly. Do you have anyone who shows up for you? Sarah paused. Her eyes dropped to the pavement. No, she admitted. Not really. My position, it scares people, or it attracts the wrong ones, people who want access, power, connections. Not me. She laughed once, a bitter sound. Imagine going years without having a real conversation that doesn't involve corporate agendas. Mark's expression softened. Sounds lonely. It is, she whispered. But I don't get to say that out loud. CEOs can't be lonely. We're supposed to be unbreakable. The silence that followed wasn't empty, was understanding, deep and quiet. Sarah brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her hazel eyes lifting to meet his. I don't know why I'm telling you this, she said. Maybe because you don't look at me like I'm unreachable. Mark chuckled lightly. You came to me asking for car help in the middle of my blind date. Hard to feel intimidated after that. She rolled her eyes with a smile, nudging his arm in playful protest, and the brief touch sent a surprising warmth through them both. Under the pale parking lot lights, with the engine humming gently beside them, Something shifted, an invisible thread tightening between two people from entirely different worlds. No romantic declarations, no dramatic music, just a quiet spark, a sense that for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt completely alone. And as they stood there in the stillness, sharing pieces of their lives that rarely saw the light, both Mark and Sarah sensed it. Something meaningful had begun, born not from intention, but from coincidence, honesty, and the rare comfort of being understood. When Sarah finally straightened from the car, brushing dust from her hands and letting out a deep, relieved exhale, Mark realized how quiet the night had grown around them. The once busy restaurant behind them now felt distant, muffled, as though the world had stepped back to give them space. "We should go inside," Mark said gently, more out of obligation than desire. He wasn't eager to return to the stiff conversations and clinking glasses waiting on the other side of those polished doors. But when they walked back in together, Sarah with her coat slightly wrinkled from crouching under a car, Mark with faint smudges still on his sleeves, the scene that greeted them was startlingly simple. Their table was empty. Emma was gone. The half-finished glasses of water sat untouched, chairs neatly pushed back, and a small folded napkin lay where she had been sitting. Mark picked it up, brow furrowing as he opened it. The handwriting was graceful, deliberate. "It's okay. Your story wasn't meant to be with me. Good luck with whatever tonight turns into." Sarah looked up at him, guilt shadowing her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she murmured. "I didn't mean to pull you away like that." Mark shook his head. "You didn't pull me. I chose to help you." She hesitated, searching his face for resentment, but finding none. Instead, she found quiet warmth, the kind she didn't realize she'd been craving. "Still, I feel like I hijacked your night," she said with a nervous laugh, her fingers brushing the edge of her briefcase. "And judging by that note, your date definitely noticed." Mark slid the napkin into his pocket. "It wasn't going anywhere," he admitted, voice soft but honest. "Emma's nice, but there was no spark." Sarah's lips parted slightly, a flicker of something unspoken crossing her expression. Surprise? Relief? She glanced toward the exit, then back at him. "Well, I owe you at least a proper meal, or coffee, or something that doesn't involve you repairing my disasters in a parking lot." Mark chuckled. "A second first date?" he teased lightly. She looked down, smiling shyly. "Maybe, if you'd want that." Her vulnerability hit him unexpectedly. This woman, who commanded boardrooms and carried the weight of an empire, was looking at him like his answer genuinely mattered. Mark didn't look away. "Yeah," he said simply. "I'd like that." Something softened in her shoulders, something she'd been holding up for far too long. She reached for the menu still resting on the table, flipping it open awkwardly. "Well," she said, clearing her throat with a playful, almost nervous tone, "what does someone order after a night like this?" Mark grinned as he sat across from her, the restaurant suddenly feeling warmer and far less intimidating than before. "Dessert," he said. "Always dessert." Sarah laughed, the sound fuller now, lighter, as though a weight had been pulled from her chest. And as they began talking again, this time without pretense, without masks, the atmosphere between them shifted entirely. Gone was the awkward stiffness of the earlier date. Gone was the CEO persona she usually carried. Sitting across from each other were simply two people, two single parents, two tired souls, two unexpected allies sharing a moment that felt strangely, beautifully right. And though neither said the words aloud, both felt it. Tonight had stopped being an interruption. It had become the beginning of something neither of them had planned, but both of them suddenly wanted. The soft melody of the restaurant's piano drifted around them as Mark and Sarah settled into their seats, the menus forgotten between them as real conversation flowed more naturally than either expected. What began with hesitant smiles soon eased into genuine warmth, Mark telling stories about Lily's mischievous bedtime routines, Sarah sharing small, rare glimpses of her life behind the CEO curtain. She spoke about losing her mother young, about feeling the pressure to prove her worth in a world that doubted her at every turn, and Mark listened with the kind of patience that made her feel, perhaps for the first time in years, truly heard. He spoke of his struggles raising Lily alone, how some nights he collapsed onto the couch unsure if he was doing enough, and Sarah listened with the softness that made him feel seen rather than judged. Dessert arrived unnoticed, plates placed gently before them, but neither touched the food for long minutes. They were too busy discovering unexpected similarities in their opposite worlds. "It's strange," Sarah murmured, stirring her spoon absent-mindedly through a swirl of chocolate. "I spend every day surrounded by people, but tonight is the first time in a long time haven't felt alone." Her voice wasn't dramatic, just honest, and that honesty struck something tender inside Mark. He reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, but close enough that the gesture said everything he couldn't find the words for yet. "You're not alone tonight," he said softly. She looked up, her hazel eyes catching the golden restaurant light, and for a moment, she simply held his gaze, the tension in her shoulders easing as if the truth in his words offered her real comfort. They talked until the staff began gently stacking chairs in the far corner, the dining room thinning until they were one of the last tables still occupied. When they finally stepped outside, the city streets had quieted, a cool breeze sweeping across the pavement as though welcoming the new understanding between them. Sarah pulled her coat closer, not from cold, but from the unfamiliar flutter in her chest. "I don't usually do this," she said with a breathy laugh, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Open up. Talk like this." Mark smiled warmly. "Me neither." They stood there for a moment, neither rushing to end the evening, both reluctant to let go of whatever had formed between them. Sarah shifted slightly, her voice lower now. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "My life is messy, complicated. I work too much. I barely have time to breathe some days." Mark stepped a little closer, his presence steady, grounding. "That's okay," he said gently. "We're not deciding a future. We're just seeing where this goes." Her eyes softened. "And where do you think it could go?" He smiled. "Somewhere worth exploring." She let out a slow breath, hopeful, cautious, but undeniably drawn in, and nodded. "Then let's explore it." They exchanged numbers, a simple but meaningful promise. And as Sarah slid into her repaired car, she rolled down the window, offering him a soft, genuine smile. "Good night, Mark." "Good night, Sarah," he replied. He watched her drive away, not with disappointment, but with the quiet certainty humming in his chest. Something had begun tonight, a connection neither of them had expected, one built not on status or circumstance, but on honesty, vulnerability, and the comfort of being seen. And though the night ended, the promise of what lay ahead lingered warmly in the city air, hinting at a future that might just rewrite both their stories forever. If you loved this emotional twist-filled story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more heart-touching tales on Drew Daily Stories. New episodes drop every day. Don't miss the next chapter.